The moment he stepped off the transport and into his own driveway, everything he had imagined during long nights overseas collapsed. For months, deployment had been sustained by a single promise. Home meant safety, love, and reunion. He had replayed the image countless times, his wife running toward him, his daughter laughing, the weight of war finally lifting. Instead, silence greeted him. The house looked the same, yet something felt off, the kind of instinct soldiers learn to trust when danger is close but unseen. His duffel bag felt heavier as he pushed the door open, not because of its contents, but because of the invisible tension pressing against his chest. Inside, the air was wrong. Familiar smells were mixed with something foreign, something that did not belong. His eyes moved automatically, scanning corners, doorways, reflections in glass. Then he heard a laugh, a soft, unfamiliar male voice paired with his daughter's innocent giggle. Time slowed. Training taught him to stay calm under fire, but this was worse than combat. This was personal. Every step toward the living room felt like walking through deep water, his mind refusing to accept what his instincts already knew. When he turned the corner, the image burned itself into him permanently. Another man stood there, close, far too close, holding his daughter as if he had the right. His wife was nearby, relaxed, unashamed, caught in a moment she clearly believed was safe. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The lover's face drained of color. His wife's eyes widened, not with guilt, but with fear of being exposed. His daughter smiled, unaware, trusting the world as children do. That smile was the only thing keeping him upright. In that instant, the betrayal cut deeper than any wound he'd taken overseas. He had risked his life daily for people who didn't know his name, believing his own family was protected by his sacrifice. Seeing that sacrifice mocked inside his own home shattered something fundamental. It wasn't just infidelity, it was desecration. His absence, his duty, had been used as an opportunity rather than honored as a burden shared. Rage surged, hot and violent, but discipline held it back. Years of training prevented him from exploding. He understood that losing control would cost him everything: his daughter, his future, his freedom. So he did what soldiers do best. He observed, memorized, and planned. He took in every detail: the man's posture, the fear in his eyes, the way his wife instinctively stepped toward her lover instead of her husband. That told him all he needed to know. He gently took his daughter from the man's arms, feeling her small hands cling to his neck. That touch grounded him. It reminded him why he had survived explosions, ambushes, and endless nights of fear. He said nothing. Words would have been wasted. Silence was heavier. In that quiet, both adults understood this was not a moment that would pass. This was the beginning of consequences. The shock of betrayal did not break him, it sharpened him. As he walked away with his daughter, he left behind the illusion of a family, but he carried something stronger forward: clarity. Whatever came next would not be reckless or impulsive. It would be deliberate, controlled, and final. The moment his daughter wrapped her arms around his neck, the world narrowed to her heartbeat against his chest. Her hair smelled like the shampoo he used to buy, the one she liked because it made bubbles in the bath. That simple familiarity clashed violently with the reality behind him. Until that second, betrayal had been an adult crime. Lies, secrecy, broken vows. But now it crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. This wasn't just about a cheating spouse anymore. This was about a child being placed into a situation she was too innocent to understand. His daughter looked at him with pure trust, the kind that assumes fathers always arrive in time. She didn't sense danger. She didn't recognize boundaries being violated. To her, the man who had been holding her was just another adult, someone allowed into her world by the people she relied on most. That realization hit harder than the sight of the affair itself. Infidelity wounded pride and loyalty, but involving a child corrupted something sacred. It meant his absence had not just been filled, it had been replaced. A flood of thoughts rushed through his mind, sharp and unforgiving. How long had this man been around her? Had he tucked her into bed, read her stories, spoken to her as if he belonged? Each question tightened his grip just enough to remind himself to breathe. In combat, threats were clear. Here, the danger was invisible, wrapped in familiarity and deception. That made it worse. This was a violation that wore the mask of normal life. His wife tried to speak, her voice trembling, but he didn't hear the words. All he could see was the way his daughter's fingers clutched his collar, as if she sensed the shift in him, even if she didn't understand it. Children always know when safety changes. That instinct fueled something deep inside him, a protective force older than logic, stronger than rage. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about containment, about removing poison before it spread further. He realized then that the true breaking point wasn't seeing another man in his home. It was understanding that his child's sense of security had been gambled away for secrecy and comfort. Trust, once fractured at that level, didn't just affect adults. It shaped how a child learned to see the world. He refused to let his daughter grow up thinking boundaries were flexible or that love came with hidden dangers. He adjusted his posture, calming his breathing the way he had been trained to do under fire. Losing control now would only create chaos, and chaos was where children got hurt. Instead, he chose presence, stability. He spoke softly to his daughter, reassuring her, telling her everything was okay, even though nothing was. Those words weren't for the room, they were a promise to himself. As he carried her toward the hallway, he felt the weight of responsibility settle fully onto his shoulders. Whatever came next, lawyers, confrontations, fallout, would be filtered through a single question: does this protect my child? That clarity erased hesitation. The situation had escalated beyond personal betrayal into moral obligation. In that moment, something inside him hardened, not into cruelty, but into resolve. He would not scream. He would not strike. He would dismantle the threat systematically, ensuring his daughter's world would be rebuilt on truth and safety. Her innocence had been endangered, and that made everything else secondary. The anger was there, undeniable and immense, but it did not own him. It sat beneath the surface, coiled and contained, shaped by years of discipline, forged in places where losing control meant losing lives. He had learned long ago that rage was a weapon only when guided. Otherwise, it turned inward and destroyed everything it touched. Standing in that house with his daughter safe in his arms, he made a choice that defined everything that followed. He would not become the reckless stereotype they might later try to paint him as. He would be precise. Every instinct screamed for confrontation, for shouting, for immediate punishment, but instinct was not command. He had operated under pressure where a single impulsive move could compromise an entire mission. This was no different. The stakes were simply more personal. He understood that one uncontrolled moment could cost him custody, credibility, and the future he needed to secure for his child. So he slowed himself down deliberately, letting the silence do the work that violence never could. He took mental notes with the same focus he once used on hostile terrain. The way the lover avoided eye contact, the way his wife spoke too quickly, offering explanations no one had asked for. The room itself told a story: shoes by the door that didn't belong to him, a jacket draped over a chair, a sense of routine that proved this wasn't a single mistake but a pattern. These details mattered. Truth was built from observation, not accusation. He didn't argue. He didn't demand answers. That surprised them more than shouting ever would have. Calm unsettled them. It created uncertainty, and uncertainty made people careless. He knew that if he waited, they would reveal more on their own than they ever would under pressure. People exposed themselves when they believed the danger had passed. Later, alone with his thoughts, he replayed the moment again and again, not to fuel anger, but to refine purpose. Revenge that came from emotion burned fast and left nothing but regret. What he intended required patience. He would act within the boundaries of law and truth, because those were weapons no one could take away from him. He wanted outcomes that lasted, consequences that couldn't be undone by apologies or manipulation. He began organizing quietly. Documents, timelines, messages that told a fuller story than words ever could. He resisted the urge to confront too soon, understanding that timing was everything. Each day he stayed composed increased his advantage. His silence became a mirror they couldn't avoid, forcing them to confront their own guilt without him lifting a finger. At night, when the house was quiet and his daughter slept peacefully, the anger returned in waves. But instead of feeding it, he redirected it. He reminded himself that strength wasn't proven by dominance but by restraint, that the most devastating response was one that left no room for retaliation. He wasn't fighting for pride anymore. He was securing a future. When the time came, his actions would be measured, undeniable, and irreversible, not because they were cruel, but because they were correct. He would expose the truth in a way that protected his child and preserved his integrity. Controlled rage wasn't weakness. It was mastery, and mastery ensured that when everything finally came into the open, he would be standing on solid ground while their world collapsed under the weight of their own choices. He understood early on that destroying someone privately was never as effective as letting the truth dismantle them in the open. Secrecy had protected the betrayal. Exposure would be the force that ended it. Lies survived only in darkness, and once dragged into the light, they collapsed under their own weight. He didn't need to exaggerate or fabricate anything. Reality, documented and revealed carefully, would do far more damage than anger ever could. He started by gathering what already existed. Messages left carelessly on devices, patterns in schedules, receipts that told stories no one thought to hide. There was no rush. The longer he observed, the clearer the picture became. What had felt like a sudden shock was, in truth, a sustained deception. Each discovery reinforced his decision not to confront prematurely. People who believed they were safe continued to make mistakes, and every mistake added another layer of undeniable proof. He consulted professionals quietly, people whose job was to see facts, not emotions. Lawyers didn't ask him how angry he was. They asked what he could prove. That suited him perfectly. The narrative would not be about revenge or outrage. It would be about responsibility, boundaries crossed, and a child placed in an inappropriate situation. He framed everything through that lens, because that was the truth, and truth was his strongest position. When exposure began, it wasn't dramatic or chaotic. It was structured. Family members were informed with evidence rather than accusations. Mutual friends were shown timelines rather than rumors. The story didn't spread as gossip. It spread as fact. Each person who learned the truth reacted the same way, not with shock, but with disappointment. That reaction hurt more than shouting ever could. Disappointment stripped away excuses and left nothing to hide behind. His wife tried to control the narrative at first, but narratives collapse when they don't align with evidence. Every attempt to minimize or justify only revealed more contradictions. The lover faded quickly once accountability approached. He had been brave in secrecy, confident in shadows. Under scrutiny, he disappeared, unwilling to stand in the light he had helped create. That absence spoke volumes. The most powerful moment came when he didn't need to speak at all. Sitting across from mediators and attorneys, he simply presented what he had. Calm, prepared, focused on his child's well-being. There was no anger to point at, no instability to exploit. That composure shifted the balance completely. He wasn't asking for sympathy, he was demonstrating responsibility. Public exposure wasn't about humiliation for its own sake. It was about consequence. Actions had ripples, and those ripples reached workplaces, families, reputations. The truth redefined how people saw them, not because he demanded judgment, but because judgment was unavoidable once the facts were known. Trust, once broken publicly, did not regenerate easily. Through it all, he remained consistent. No social media rants. No threats, no scenes. That restraint became its own statement. While others scrambled to defend themselves, he stood firm, letting the process unfold. Justice, when allowed to function properly, didn't need force. By the time everything settled, the damage wasn't something he had inflicted directly. It was damage they had caused themselves, accelerated only by the removal of secrecy. Exposure had done what confrontation never could. It ensured the truth stayed permanent. When everything finally quieted, he realized the victory he felt had nothing to do with watching others fall. It came from standing intact after a storm that could have destroyed him. The chaos had passed, the truth was established, and the future, once uncertain, now had shape and direction. What surprised him most was the absence of satisfaction in their suffering. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt relieved. Justice, he learned, was quieter than revenge but far more lasting. His days began to revolve around structure again. Morning routines with his daughter, school drop-offs, evenings spent rebuilding a sense of normalcy that had been fractured but not lost. Children adapted faster than adults when given honesty and stability. She laughed easily, slept peacefully, and trusted without fear. Watching that trust remain intact confirmed he had chosen the right path. He had protected not just her safety, but her understanding of love and boundaries. People occasionally asked how he stayed so calm through everything. He never gave a dramatic answer. Calm wasn't something he discovered after the fact. It was something he decided on early. Revenge would have kept him tethered to the past, replaying moments he wanted to forget. Justice allowed him to move forward without dragging their actions behind him like a chain. He refused to let betrayal define the rest of his life. There were moments of reflection late at night when the weight of it all resurfaced. The loss of a marriage, the shattering of a future he once imagined. He allowed himself to feel that grief without letting it harden him. Strength, he realized, wasn't about closing off emotion. It was about processing it without letting it poison what came next. Healing wasn't linear, but it was possible. He focused on rebuilding his identity beyond anger. He trained, worked, and reconnected with parts of himself that had been set aside by both war and domestic turmoil. Friends noticed a change, not bitterness, but clarity. He spoke less about what had happened and more about where he was going. That shift mattered. It told the world and himself that he was no longer reacting. He was choosing. The final sense of redemption came not from external validation, but from quiet moments of certainty. Sitting beside his daughter during a school event, listening to her talk about her day, knowing that when she looked at him, she saw safety, not chaos. That was the standard by which he measured success. He didn't need apologies. He didn't need closure conversations. The truth had already done its work. Walking away with dignity proved more powerful than any final confrontation could have been. He had faced betrayal, protected innocence, and emerged without losing himself. In the end, justice wasn't about ruining others. It was about refusing to be ruined. He reclaimed his life, safeguarded his child, and stepped forward unburdened. That was the real victory, and it belonged entirely to him.